So once the currency and tax system is in place, and the people of the world have experienced enough pain to accept anything to get themselves out of it, the new global debt machine will crank up out of Asia, because banks need assets to run their leveraging machine, and that's where all the assets are. It will reinflate the system over the course of several decades, pumping debt through the nations based on the new currency and taxing the value back up to the top. Structurally, it will end up looking almost exactly like the empire system we've discussed in this series. The differences are that this one will be ruled by the Bank of International Settlements and the IMF, or some other global banking institution that has yet to be announced, and now the administrative districts will be nations rather than states. It will depend on a global interest and tax system to feed the top, just like the pyramid from Lesson 1. And the interest part already exists. That's just the global bond market, where most nations already feed this central banking system. This system will also have the notion of too big to fail, to justify stealing from the world's population to prop up the elite institutions. We've already seen this as the U.S. government stripped wealth from its people to hand it over to foreign banking interests. And that happened both from direct payments from Treasury and indirect shenanigans played by the Federal Reserve. So that means the U.S. government is already playing this global too big to fail game. Beyond the willingness to hand its people's wealth over to foreign banks, the U.S. government is currently the primary enforcement body for the global administrative districts. That's the purpose of State Department, the CIA, along with Britain's MI5 and 6 being in nearly every country in the world. We're ensuring global conformity and compliance. And when nations don't comply, well, the Defense Department comes in and stomps all over them. It's no surprise that the U.S. military is leading campaigns in areas of the world that have thus far refused to submit to the Anglo banking and corporate system. And what I'm saying here may be upsetting some of your patriotic emotions, but just think about it. Not only are state and CIA in most of the world, but the U.S. military is in 75% of all countries. 75%! We're supposedly a free republic. We started as a nation opposed to the very idea of standing armies, and today our standing army controls far more global territory than King George III ever dreamed of. It's quite clear we're building a global empire. Things are changing domestically as well. The U.S. government is morphing into a top-down control system based on the Chinese model. And that's the purpose of Homeland Security. Despite the PR and marketing, it exists to clamp down on American citizens, shifting the U.S. government from one that gets its power from the consent of the governed to one that gets its power from controlling the governed. And we've seen this kind of shift around the world. As nations conform more to the Chinese model of control, the goal is to replace them all with the United Nations, or some other form of global government that maintains standardization across the board. A new government system running on the new global taxation system, it's an important part of the future plan, but just like in Lesson 1, the government is really just a secondary power, when compared to the real power in this system, the most senior financial interests in the world. The Bank of England, its extension, the Federal Reserve, and the rest of the primary central banks. Real top-down power in the empire system I've described since Lesson 1 comes from controlling people's money and the people's governments with debt. Government works for those controllers and is just used to keep the people in line to protect the financiers while the debt machine does its magic. To understand more about this future system, we need to look at it from a perspective of class. Now, some of you hear that and immediately think, whoa, this guy's a commie. No, I'm just describing the reality of the situation rather than believing the false propaganda that we live in a free, classless society. Look, Karl Marx was wrong about a whole lot, but he was right about this thing called the bourgeois class. I know it well. So did Teddy Roosevelt. This is what he said. This group drives this system and builds the oligarchy at the top. Put the right bonus plan and incentives in front of them, and they will run around the racetrack like any good racehorse, collecting their prize. They need to take the blinders off. Many of them know in their guts they're not fulfilling the real purpose for their lives, but their heads are trained to think they are. Roosevelt was right that the ones that really succeed in the system because they're devoted to nothing else generally don't know much and aren't really worth listening to. Well, that is unless you're interviewing with them for a job. But here's a couple examples of these people. When you have time, listen to a recent Jamie Dimon speech at Harvard Business School on YouTube to see how a guy so admired by the elite media and being set up as a future Treasury Secretary is a total empty suit and still sounds like a college frat boy with nothing meaningful to say, even though he's in his 50s. This is an example of the type of person in this class. He's devoted his life to getting rich by putting millions in debt and stripping the world of its resources and value to put it in the deep pockets of the folks behind Chase, Citi, and other Wall Street firms. And that's all he knows. Or remember from the first season of The Apprentice, when during a tour of his gold penthouse in New York, Donald Trump said, "This is what life's all about." Really. That's not even worth responding to. The point is self-evident. And I'm not trying to attack these guys personally, as much as I'm trying to just have us reflect on the system we've been living in for such a long time. Now, one of the things Marx was wrong about was only identifying these bourgeois types and the proletariat. He didn't point out the ruling class above both of them. And that was a terrible mistake. The world has lived for a century believing not only that the Wall Street-driven capitalism has no aristocracy, but also that communism has none. The fact is, both are ruled from a central top-down power. And the top-down system in this planned global empire is based on the British system of an imperial ruling class and a financial ruling class operating together to maintain total control. Then below the ruling class is the bourgeois, the top of which in the U.S. is found in the Council on Foreign Relations. I mentioned this club in Lesson 3. It's partially above the line here because the inner circle of core financiers in CFR are part of the global ruling class. But most of the council is just the mindless bourgeois, the careerists, the uppity, those who are easily co-opted by the ruling class to make sure they do their bidding. They're fairly clueless about what's really going on. Then the World Economic Forum in Davos is an important club of the bourgeois class. I label them globalists because a key for the ruling class's plan is to create a new bourgeois with no national allegiance. And they've done so. These people enjoy hobnobbing in Monaco and Davos above the fray of nationalism, which they think is only for the dumb masses of the world. And then the Clinton Global Initiative is another key organization for building the globalist bourgeois class. This one brings cachet and star personality. Most people wouldn't be interested in hanging out with the old Wall Street control freaks that run the CFR, even though they brought Angelina Jolie into it to try to increase its star power. But if you have a guy like Clinton running a sister organization to recruit many more people from the cool crowd, then you get a lot more momentum behind your initiative to create a global corporate empire. The math of the bond market is the key to building this empire, but the ruling class needs the bourgeois to move along with it in order to really make it happen. And that's the purpose of these organizations. And then at the bottom of the pyramid are all the servants and the enforcers who will keep them in line. You see this type of police force being built in almost every country around the world. Again, this is not random chaos. It's an intricate pattern that makes it clear countries are becoming standardized on the Chinese model. So looking at the empire from this class perspective helps us understand what's been called the New World Order. Don't worry about all the films that depict it as a result of evil demons and macabre forces. It's actually a very real, very human, and quite simple system being used to expand our current monetary system to the rest of the globe. It's what we covered in Lessons 1, 2, and 3. Only now it's expanding to do to the rest of the world in the 21st century what it did to America in the 20th. It created a system where everyone is helplessly dependent on mega institutions for their survival. This system is doing the same globally. So forget the idea that this is a loving, sort of global community where we're all holding hands. Rather, it's a system driving meaningless, mindless growth for the sake of creating a corporatized planet where everything is managed by spreadsheets and bond traders. As lower-class folks outside the U.S. already know, this just results in a few financiers getting rich while everyone else is controlled and poor. If you remember Wendell Berry from Lesson 4, he has said the same thing. We must start teaching people how the math of debt-based money vacuums wealth to the top of the pyramid, leaving others in debt, and therefore poor. And it's not just poor in financial terms. As Lesson 4 illustrated, besides material goods and economic statistics, this empire system values none of the deeper things that human beings typically value. All these things get reduced to afterthoughts. Pursuing bank credit to pay debt and taxes becomes the purpose of life in this system. And this is not a recipe for a new enlightenment, a new renaissance, or anything else worth pursuing. It's the recipe for the next dark ages. Do you want to see that? If not, it's time to break your silence and start speaking out. We can create Renaissance 2.0 instead of the next dark ages, but you need to play an active role. The next lesson considers how to do this. And it's time for us to start talking about a brighter future.